What we discussed last week, in terms of the mitzvah of Bris Milah, so we spoke a little bit about what the mitzvah is, and we spoke about kares, which a person gets for not getting a Bris Milah, and we discussed the machlokas between the Rambam and the Ravid, when exactly kares happens. The shit of the Rambam, that it's only after you die you get kares. You have your whole life to get a Bris Milah, and if you die without a Bris Milah, you get kares. And according to the Ravid, the moment that you turn 13, you have kares. The only way to get rid of it is by getting a Bris Milah, and we discussed some nafkaminas between those two things. What we're going to speak about this evening, at least we'll see how far we get, is first, who does the mitzvah belong to? And belong is an important word here. And the second is, what exactly is the nature of this mitzvah? And we'll explain what that means as well. But just off the bat, who should be doing the mitzvah of Bris Milah? The father. That's one of the mitzvahs that a father does for his son, is he gives his son a Bris Milah. Good. And we pointed out what happens if the father doesn't give the son a Bris Milah? Say what?
The mother.
So the mother, or
the community,
or
the designated agent.
By whom?
Oh, sorry, I thought we meant literally if the father doesn't do it, not if he abdicates.
Yeah.
Arranging
the person himself.
Yeah.
So if you're 13, then you look down and you go, huh? You go, okay, I guess I have to have a Bris Milah. So
is that what Abraham did?
Yes, but Abraham was commanded at the age of 99 to give himself a Bris Milah, right? I mean, the dollar at the top of the page. So page the test, yeah. So he says as follows. He says, "Mevur b'shas kiddushin chavtesim dalaf." The Gemara says in kiddushin, and the Rambam, that's the Reish Mem, the Rambam Perik Aleph Milah Halacha Aleph, the very beginning of the halachas of Bris Milah in the Rambam. He says, "V'zel Lashon." This is what the Rambam says: "Mitzvah ala av lemul espenai." There is an obligation from the Torah for a father to give a Bris Milah to his son. Va'al harav lemul es avdai, and on the master to give a Bris Milah to his slave. That is, if a Jew purchases a non-Jewish slave, there's an obligation of giving them a Bris Milah. You lead Bayis and Miknas Kasef, whether it's a slave that's born in the house, meaning born to your maidservant, or one that you purchase. And then discusses what happens if you don't. Okay. It says that Avara Av, what happens if you don't? The next part of the line, it says, based in Mitzuvim Lamul Haben Va'evet. And if the father abdicates, he doesn't do the mitzvah. So then based in is now obligated to that. Based in meaning the representatives of the Jewish community. The Jewish community is obligated in making sure that this child has a Bris Milah. And the people that are responsible in the community from the community are called the based in. So every town has the Vada Rabbanim. Whoever is responsible for other Jewish things in the neighborhood is responsible for this as well. So somebody makes sure that the food is kosher. Somebody makes sure that the eruv is up. Meaning, who's in charge of stuff? Those people are. Everybody is obligated in all of those things, but the normative representatives of the community take this into account as well. Meaning, this is an obligation not just on the individual father or the child. This is communal obligation. What happens if nobody does that, right? You have this situation that, somebody grows up without any Jewish community all around them, and then all of a sudden, on their grandmother's deathbed, she says, actually, I'm Jewish. Like, I never knew, right? You have a guy who's 28 years old, he's never heard of Bris Milah, he doesn't know anything about it. Good, now I need to go get a Bris Milah. What do? It says, Yigdal, when he grows up, Chayev lamul es atzmai, he needs to give a Bris Milah to himself. And the Gemaras learn this out from Psukim. Meaning, all of these things have textual sources. It says, "V'hinei mavur the ikar mitzvah la'av." It seems to be that the first and foremost, the primary obligation is on the father. Galoshan hashas sham, like the Gemara says there. It says, "V'heicha deloi malei," and when the father doesn't give the Bris Milah to his son, Malah avuam chuyav beis din. That's when the beis din is chayiv. V'chein Rambam sham halacha beis de'ein malin b'nai shel adam shalem midate. And the Rambam points out in halacha beis that you don't give a bris milah to somebody else's kid without their permission. Meaning, yes, you have an obligation, but your obligation is secondary to the father's obligation. So the father's got the primary obligation. The beis din has, meaning the Jewish people have the secondary obligation. And if nobody's taking care of that, then the kid has the obligation. Says the Minchas Chinuch, this is an interesting discussion now. He says, Va'ani misupok. I have a question as follows. Im higdil, shemitzvah gam ken alei ramya, u'mechuyev lamul atzmai, im gam ken mitzvah la'av, v'loi nafka hamitzvah me ito. What happens in the following scenario? You have a father and a son that grow up in whatever it is, somewhere in middle America, no idea that anybody is Jewish, or no idea about anything to do with Judaism. All of a sudden, they get hooked up with some Chabad house in the middle of nowhere. And the rabbi of the Chabad house looks at them and goes, hey, comes to Parshas Lech Lecha, I don't know. And the rabbi is like, Avram Avinu was commanded to give a Bris Milah. And the father puts up his hand and goes, what's that? And the rabbi explains, there's something called the Bris Milah, circumcision. It's very important, one of these fundamental aspects of being Jewish. And he goes, yeah, we never did that. And he's got a kid. The kid is 14 years old. So here's the question. Whose obligation is it now? Is it the father's obligation or is it the son's obligation? I mean, the father didn't intentionally abdicate from the mitzvah. But now that the kid is 13, does the mitzvah now belong to him and not to the father? Or is it still the father's mitzvah to make sure that the kid gets a bris milah? Now, you can look at me and go, Rabbi, what difference does this make? They both have to get a bris milah. So I'll tell you what kind of difference it makes. Like this. So he says, maybe you could say that the mitzvah for the father expires. It goes from when the boy is 8 days old until he is 13 years and 1 day old. And then the mitzvah for the father expires. There is no longer a mitzvah for this father to give his son a bris. He has now not done that mitzvah. It's over. The mitzvah is over. Or you say, no, it lasts for the rest of the kid's life, or the rest of his life. But maybe you say that by the time he gets to 13 years and 1 day, there is no longer a mitzvah for the father at all. Now, he tries to prove from the Sefer HaChinuch what the Sefer HaChinuch thinks about this. He says, from the Chinuch itself, is a shekasav al mi milas b'nai. So who's obligated to this? He says milas b'nav haktanim, that the father is obligated to give a circumcision to his young children, the ktanim, the little ones. He says nirik tzas davka b'nav haktanim. Maybe you can make the argument that he only means you are obligated from the age of 8 days until 13 years, but thereafter not. What's the nafkamina? So important halachic phrase. What does nafkamina mean? No, nafkamina, what comes out from it. So close, right? Practical ramifications, practical difference. Meaning, what's the difference? Both of these situations, the father's got to give a bris, meaning they both have to have a bris milah. Good. They both have to get a bris milah. V'nafkamina de'im ha'av ba'atzma mohel. What happens if the father is a mohel? Meaning, this father that happens to be
He's an idiot.
No.
He didn't give his son a bris milah. He's a mohel.
No. He's a mohel, meaning he's a urologist. He does this all the time. He knows how to do this.
Right.
He doesn't need somebody else to do it. He does circumcisions in the hospitals all day. Just happens to be that he didn't have for himself and he didn't have for his son. Meaning, he's trained in urology. He knows how to do this. He's a mohel. He knows how to do the practical procedure. He doesn't have to hire somebody to do this. He doesn't have to get anybody to do this. What difference does that make? So he says, "Mechuyev lamul ba'atzmai begalusa gamken l'shita zashachai shemishpat siman shintei beis sivkat dalad she'osu lechabed acher." Now this is an interesting din. All of us, when giving bris milah to our children, to our sons, I don't think anybody around this table did the bris milah themselves. You did it yourself?
I did slots.
You did. Okay, good. So you did yourself. Good. So But if you know how to do it yourself, the Shach makes the argument, that's the Susika in Shulchan Aruch, that any mitzvah that you can do yourself, you're not allowed to abdicate for somebody else to do. If you can do it, you can't give it up to someone else. You can do it, so you have to do it. Meaning, it's only in a case that you are not capable of doing a Bris Milah safely that you could then give it to somebody else to do. But if you can do it, and it is your mitzvah to do, then you have to do it. So, say you have a father and a son. The father he's a urologist. He knows how to do Bris Milah. He does these surgeries all the time. So they'll explain to him the halachas of it. He'll say, okay, fine, I can do this, no problem. I can do these, I can do Milah, I can do Priya, right? The 2 stages of Milah. I'm more than happy to do it. I'm comfortable with it. Do this all the time. Not a problem at all. So if it's the father's mitzvah, then he is now obligated. He cannot give it up to do for anybody else. Now, imagine you have a situation that both the father and the son can perform a Bris Milah. So both, depending on whose mitzvah it is, you might be obligated to do it yourself. If the son is a urologist, he knows how to give himself a Bris Milah. Does he have to now give himself a Bris Milah? Or can he have somebody else do it? If it's his mitzvah. Now, if it's his father's mitzvah, then he can give it to his father. But if it's the father's mitzvah, the son cannot do it for him. It's a zero-sum game. Whoever's mitzvah it is, if you know how to do it, you have to do it. You can't give it over to somebody else. So this is say what? Who says?
No. That's if the primary obligation, right? The schema is first dad, if not dad, then son, if not blah, blah, blah. So if dad knows how to do it and he's the first one, he can't punt it. If dad's the second place one and he knows how to do it,
why would he be the
then
second place one?
Because by the time the child is 13, maybe it's the son's mitzvah.
Because he's old enough to do it.
But does it drop in hierarchical?
So that's the question. That is the
I
question.
don't think it does, because you can look at it one way and you can say, yes, it does
Yes.
drop, and you can look at the other way and you can say, no, it doesn't drop.
Correct.
It's
That's his
still
question.
Everybody has the same obligation.
So that's why he begins this paragraph with Vani Masupa.
Because in our example, it appears that the father never really had a chance to give him a bris from 8 days.
but that's not the question. Is for this.
So,
Okay,
That's
so-
true, but maybe you could make the argument that once 13 has arrived,
Just black and white.
that's meaning he's not obligated in it anymore. The son is obligated.
Like, bar mitzvah in general, right? Like your kid can be a little Shinoi baby prior to 13, and post 13 he can't be your Shinoi baby anymore. Like the baby's turning on and off the lights. I guess we
Shouldn't
just-
do that anyway because yeah. You still shouldn't do it. It's terrible for chinuch.
My joke still stands.
Yes, the joke stands. So he says, "Im loy nafka mitzvah av hav kodim." If the father still has the mitzvah, then the father has the obligation. Then he should get then he should give the bris milah to his son. V'im lav bevadei b'nai im yochel amul ba'atzmai asal amul afilu al yidei avim. But if the son knows how to give himself a bris milah, then he cannot have anybody else do it. He needs to do it himself. Now, there's an interesting shaila in modern poskim whether or not you can have some kind of anesthetic involved. Most of the poskim suggest yes, you can absolutely have some kind of anesthetic. I mean, obviously, if you're going to do it yourself, it can't be a general anesthetic because then can't do much under general anesthetic.
Pretty much a given fact then. So if you have a convert that's a doctor
Yeah,
that knows how to do it.
yeah. Well, no. So converts is an interesting question. We'll get there. We'll get there.
I was just thinking of
Yeah.
a quicker way to get
Yes.
to that.
I had a friend in South Africa who converted. So he went to the hospital and got it done first, and then called the mohel over and they had a ceremony and pricked him. That's all
So-
he did.
So that'll work, but that's b'diavad. That's not ideal.
He was, but that's the way they allowed him to do it.
So in certain circumstances, maybe we'll get to those halachas. We'll get to the halachas of milah for.
Whenever was given
Yeah.
Brit Milah, didn't he have to give everybody, like gather everybody else?
Yes.
And did he give everybody?
Yeah, seems
He
to
gave him
be.
first, or he gave himself first?
He gave himself
He
first.
did himself first.
And then when he was in pain, huh?
Yes. Well, I mean, he probably waited a couple of days, but yeah. And then Yitzchak was the first baby 8 days old to have a bris milah. So he says this. He says, "Gam im kadam echad mehem v'asa mitzvah." But now this is interesting because there are financial ramifications to this. What are the financial ramifications? So this is the Shulchan Aruch in this is why it's in Choshen Mishpat, which is the section of Shulchan Aruch that deals with monetary law. In Shulchan Aruch in Shin Pei Beis, the Shulchan Aruch discusses the question: what happens if you steal somebody's mitzvah? You steal somebody's mitzvah. The question that the Shulchan Aruch is dealing with is, let's say the Beis Din. No. That's mitzvah b'aver. That's stealing somebody's object of a mitzvah. What if you stole somebody's mitzvah? Steal their mitzvah. So, for example, the case that the Shulchan Aruch deals with, and it's a fascinating case. What happens if you have what's called a shar hamua? That's a standard case in Baba Kama. You have a goring ox. So an ox that gores somebody and now needs to be put down. Right, you need to kill the ox. You have a dangerous animal, and the basin says you can't keep this animal anymore. You have to put it down, put the animal to sleep. So that's a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah. The basin tells you now have to do this. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. The basin has told you this is a shara muad. You have to now go put the animal to sleep. And your neighbor, who's been cheppering you about this meshuggah wild animal for forever, decides, I'm going to go and kill your dog for you. And now the basin has said that we kill the dog, right? So now I'm going to go and kill the dog for you. They stole your mitzvah. You have a chiyuv, you have a mitzvah to go and take care of this. And somebody came and did it for you. So what you can't repeat the mitzvah, now it's over. But they stole your mitzvah. So the Rama writes that we have a flat rate, at least from the days of the Gemara, a flat rate, of how much you owe somebody if you steal the mitzvah, which is 10 gold pieces. You have to pay them for stealing their mitzvah. So if it's the father's mitzvah and the son gives himself a Bris Milah, he owes his father. And if it's the father's mitzvah and the son went and did it,
and
so that,
hold the same thing.
what?
There are more customs this way, so Sfardim hold the same.
Yeah, so the Shulchan Aruch, so the Shulchan Aruch says that the Rama says that it's a flat rate of 10 zuvim. The Shulchan Aruch says that in each mitzvah the Beis Din will calculate it, what the value of that mitzvah is. So
how did you get to 10? Like,
So-
was slightly different, or?
right, so that was the standard practice, probably because they didn't have good rubrics of how to calculate the value of each mitzvah. So flat rate makes it easier.
The father-son example, there's no way to have like common intent or something.
So
You know,
it's worth pointing out that the language that the Minchas Chinuch uses here is lechabe, to honor somebody with the mitzvah. There are two ways of having somebody do the Bris Milah for your son. One is to be mechabed them, to honor somebody with doing the mitzvah, and the other is to have them act as your agent, as a shaliach. Now, for sure, the case is that you cannot be mechabed somebody if you can do it yourself. You can't say, I'm not going to do it, you do it instead. But what if you do it not through honoring somebody with a mitzvah, but having them be your agent to do the mitzvah? Which is not an honor for them, they are just acting in your stead. This is a shaliach. In that case, maybe you can get around the problem. So it's interesting. It seems to be that in different communities at different points in time, the minhag was not to ask the male to be your shaliach, but to be mechabed, to honor particularly important people with the mitzvah of giving a bris milah to my son because I can't do it myself. Today, all of the ma'alim do shlichus, right? Do it as an agency. I'm working as your agent. No, you can't.
But you pay
Officially,
them.
yes, but officially they don't take money for it. Officially, you don't take money to give a bris milah. So you speak to the malam, and it's always like a funny conversation because la halacha they can't take money for doing the mitzvah. That's another conversation for another time. But let's get to the kishkus of this. So he says v'oid nafkamina. So first practical difference is what happens if both of them can do the mitzvah. So who does the mitzvah belong to? So can one give up to the other one, or does one have to pay? So that's a question. Now we should just point out that being that the Minchas Chinuch says, I have a suffix. So let's say the son is really upset with his father. His father said to him, it's my mitzvah, I have to give you a bris milah. And the son says, okay, I guess so. That's the case. And then he finds out later that it's not so clear. So can he take his father to Beis Din and say, you owe me 10 gold pieces? You stole my mitzvah. Chinuch just said that he's not sure what the halacha is.
The Rambam
The Ram doesn't discuss this halacha.
Can't the mitzvah just be for multiple people? Like, I don't.
No, but who is obligated? Who's got the primary obligation?
Why can't I don't understand why it's a problem? Why can't it be for both?
Well, it is a mitzvah for
In
both,
that case.
but it is a mitzvah for both. But who does the action of that mitzvah? Who does the mitzvah? Somebody's got to do the mitzvah. So who does it? Who's the person that does this mitzvah? This happens, by the way, all over, and we'll give more examples of like specific examples. But
Maybe you could put his hand on.
so we have certain cases like that. What's called omid al gabov. Yeah. So there's a bunch of things that are of this nature. But we should point out that at least at this stage in the Minchas Chinuch, nobody could claim the money from anybody else because of a principle, hamotzi mechaver alav harai, which means if you want to extract money from somebody, you have to prove it. I take you to Beis Din. I go, Beis Din, Boda owes me $100. So the Beis Din will say, Boda, do you owe him $100? You say, no, I don't know who this guy is. So I said, but he owes me $100. So the Beis Din will say, good, prove it. Hamotzi mechaver is somebody that wants to extract from their friend. Alav haraya, the burden of proof is on them. Right? If I'm trying to take something away from you, I have to prove it. That's called hamotzi mechaver alav haraya. You have to prove it. Now I can't extract money from you without. So I want to say it's my mitzvah. So prove that it's your mitzvah. So we'll crack open a Minchas Chinuch in Beis Din and say Minchas Chinuch says he's not sure. So you'll say, I hold like one side of the Minchas Chinuch. I'll say, I hold like the other side of the Minchas Chinuch. Beis Din will say, we don't have a proof. Right? In order to extract money, you need a proof. You need to be able to prove that this is the din. So hamatz mechaver of arayah. We have this in many cases that when it comes to mitzvahs, when it comes to figuring out who gets what money, you need to be able to say, I have proof that you owe me money. Otherwise, you can't prove it. So, okay, that's one nafkamina. One nafkamina is the father and the son both know how to do bris milah. Which of them should do it? V'oid nafkamina. Nafkamina number 2. Nafkamina means practical ramification. Right? That which comes out from it. Practical ramification. Right? V'oid nafkamina. Another practical ramification. So this is a more common scenario. More common scenario. There are 2 brachas that are made out of bris milah. One bracha is Asher al hamila. Who makes that bracha? The mo, right? The guy that's doing the cut is going to make the bracha al hamila. The father then makes the bracha Asher kiddushon b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahachnisa b'brisa shel Avraham Avinu. Blessed are you, Hashem, who has commanded us to introduce somebody to the covenant of Abraham. That's what the father is doing. I'm bringing my son into the covenant. But that would now depend on whose mitzvah it is. It says, but maybe the father doesn't have this mitzvah at all anymore. Maybe the father should not make the bracha. It would be a bracha levatala. For the father to make this bracha, it's not his mitzvah. Right? Mm-hmm. I can't make a Asher Kisham Sesavat Sivanu al Netilas Lulav for you to shake a lulav. Right? If it's your mitzvah, you make the bracha. So whose mitzvah is it now? Practically, whose mitzvah is it? Who's making this bracha? Who's the bracha? It says v'gam nafkamin, and a third practical difference. לעניין אם אי אפשר למולוי בלי שכר, אם האב מצווה, מחויב הוא ליתן. ואם אינו מצווה, אינו מחויב יעשה מכל ישראל. Says, and third, probably the most heartbreaking and relevant, is what happens if there's one moil in town, but he charges a lot of money for this. And the father cannot afford to do this. Can't afford to. So who's obligated to pay for this? So if it's the father's mitzvah, so then he has to pay for it. And if it's the son's mitzvah, then he has to pay for it. And if the son says, I can't, so then the Jewish community needs to pay for it. Somebody's got to pay for it, but can we say to the father, it's your mitzvah? It's your mitzvah. You have to pay for it. Go take out a mortgage, go pay for the Bris Milah. You have the mitzvah. Go knocking door to door, make sure that your son gets a Bris Milah.
Can you split the payer from the person who actually does the action?
Yes.
Let's say it was the son's action, but the father said, I'm going to pay for it.
That's okay. The father's doing a kind thing, but who's obligated to pay for it? Right? Rabbi Nachman always gives us the example in Shir that when the Torah says put on tefillin, so you say, but I don't have tefillin. Does that mean that you are exempt from the mitzvah of tefillin? No. Why not?
Because it said do it.
Still says to do it.
Go get tefillin, but I don't have tefillin. So either go make a friend, borrow their tefillin.
That's part of the mitzvah. Is to
Right.
obtain tefillin to put them on.
Right. Or figure it out, learn how to slaughter an animal, how to kasher it, how to clean it, how to make parchment, how to write the parshas of the tefillin, how to make the straps. Or go out,
Hustle.
make a living, go to college, pay for tefillin.
It's expensive.
Right.
I'm buying one.
That's what I'm saying.
It's like $1,500.
Right. It's not cheap.
College is filling.
It's brilliant.
There are some degrees that are cheaper.
And that's the cheap one.
Right.
The expensive it's like $5,000.
Right. There's the Tesla and so tefillin are not cheap, but the Torah says you gotta put on tefillin. So one of two things: either figure out how to make tefillin, or figure out how to earn a living, so that you can buy tefillin. You have an obligation to give your son a bris milah, but who has the obligation to give this boy a bris milah? You only discovered yesterday that there's something called bris milah. Are you now obligated to go and pay for it? Who says? This is an important practical difference. Somebody that can't afford to get a bris milah for their son. What's the din? So we've asked the question. We've given three possible nafkaminas, and we gave maybe a hint that the Minchas Chinuch suggests that maybe the Sefer HaChinuch thinks that it's a mitzvah on the father only while the child is up until the age of 13. But after that, maybe not. But this is Mesupik. He says, I don't know. So what's the halacha? What's the halacha? So turn over the page. So he says, let me give a suggestion. Let me give a suggestion for how to figure out this question. He says, lichara, one could make the suggestion, we can make the argument, that forever the mitzvah is on the father. Because the Gemara there in Kiddushin explains all of the things that a father is obligated to do for his son. What's a father obligated to do for his son? So that's the last one.
Torah.
Has to teach him, has to give him bris milah, has to do pidyon haben. Pidyon haben is only if it is a firstborn son, right?
And no miscarriages.
Right? Firstborn completely, right? Firstborn natural birth, firstborn son. So he has to give pidyon haben. Last Yisha, he's got to marry him off. Right? He's got to teach him a trade. He's got to teach him how to swim. He's got to teach him Torah. What?
Got him train his kids, right?
Right? Exactly. So all of these things, you have to do these things. When do those mitzvahs expire? Never, right? Now, he makes the argument. He says, last year, Isha, vada begadlusa. you are not obligated to marry. I mean, you see that the Minchas Chinuch was Hasidish. It was a Talmud of the Chassid of the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz. But you see that he doesn't make such a Hasidish argument here. He says, for sure, when you marry off your son, he's older than Bar Mitzvah, right? Probably in some communities that wasn't the case. You married them before Bar Mitzvah, right? It's like the joke that they say in the Hasidic Shtibel, that the Gabbai goes up to the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, we only have one Aliyah left, but we have a Bar Mitzvah boy and a Chassan. Who should we give the Aliyah to? And the Rebbe goes, whoever's oldest. Right? You give it to the whoever's oldest. Okay, good. So he says, you're certainly marrying off your son when he's over the age of Bar Mitzvah, right? You're not going to marry him off when he's 9. You have to give him a Bris Milah when he's 8 days old, and you marry him. But this is all in the same category of things that a father's obligated. You can't tell me that the mitzvah to marry off your son expires when he is 13. That would be ludicrous. Nobody would do that. I mean, that reductio ad absurdum. It's impossible to. I'm only obligated to marry off my son, but at 13 he's on his own. Now he's going to figure it out himself. He didn't finish trade school by the time he's 30. Now he's on his own. No, of course you have to.
It doesn't say you're only obligated to support the child until he's 6. The Gemara says.
Or until they know what they're doing. If you haven't taught your son a trade, you haven't enabled them to make a living, so now you're in trouble. You have to keep supporting them until you put them through school.
I didn't see the part.
That's pashtus.
He just said until he was 6, and that's it.
Yeah, that's assuming that at 6 you can go work on a field. You can milk a cow. You can pick up some eggs. You can do something. But if you haven't trained your kid, if your child is not capable of doing anything to support themselves, then that's your problem.
Fortnite doesn't count.
Right. Meaning, unless you're making money doing that, right?
Streamer, but then you have other problems that you put your underage children on live stream.
Right. Which is a problem.
You shouldn't be in charge of them anymore.
No. But that's
But they could make money, so you know.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's the upper echelons of Chinese child slave trade. It's the TikTok streamer game thing, right? Yeah. It says it seems to be, says the Minchas Chinuch, that none of these mitzvahs expire. To give a Bris Milah would not expire either by the time the child turns 13. To give them to be part of them to do Pidyon Haben also doesn't expire. Meaning, at the point in time that you realize I need to get this done, you got to get it done. You don't get to. It doesn't expire. He says, he says, I like this argument, but I'm not sure that it holds weight. Why not? He says, because we proved the obligation for the father to do all of these things for his son from psukim. I mean, there's psukim that tell you that you have to marry off your son. There's psukim that tell you that you have to do a pidyon haben. There's psukim that tell you all of this. He says, it doesn't say in any of those places that it's only for young children, only under the age of Bar Mitzvah. He says, pidyon haben. Pidyon haben, it says, you have to redeem the firstborn of your son. It doesn't say the firstborn of your son below the age of Bar Mitzvah. He says, it seems to be that's for a grown-up child as well. But Talmud Torah and teaching them Torah, we learn from these psukim, right? We learn from the psukim, you have to teach your children. How old is your child that you're obligated to teach him? Doesn't say. Teach your child. Teach your children. Until they are capable of being knowledgeable and learning by themselves, you are obligated to teach them. Rav Soloveitchik would often say when people ask him, what do you do? He said, I'm a melamed dardiki. Means I teach children. Teach children. Now, the children that Rav Soloveitchik taught were in their 20s. He says, why is it called teaching children? Because the obligation is to teach children until they are capable of learning themselves. He says, until my Talmidim are capable of, being conversant in learning, they're children. You keep on learning until you are conversant to the point that you have the capacity to stand on your own 2 feet. He says, until then, we're all children. Arguably, we're all still children, no matter how old we are. In Soloveitchik share, it would, yeah. He says, the pasuk says, you have to make sure your children get married. It doesn't say you're young children. But what about Milah? What pasuk teaches you to give your son a Bris Milah? Aval gabi mila the ikari al fusa da av mitzav al benoi hu min apasuk v'yom la'Avraham etz Yitzchak benoi ben yishmanas yomim kasher tziva osay Elokim. The pasuk that tells you to give a bris milah to your son says the age of your son. Give him a bris milah when he is 8 days old. It says muchach den istave al zeh. It seems to be that that's the primary mitzvah. Umilas Yitzchak ben chas yom. Yitzchak was 8 days old. That's when the mitzvah of giving your son a bris milah is. But there's the only one that you have a pasuk that tells you this mitzvah is when your child is 8 days old. But maybe it means dafka your child, and it starts from 8 days old. Maybe that does expire. Meaning maybe the pasuk itself. So maybe you can't learn from the juxtaposition of all of these things in the same category. That those things don't expire. Yeah, those things don't expire because the pasuk doesn't give you any time for it. But this expires because the pasuk tells you give a bris milah to your son when he's 8 days old. So and maybe if you want to say that the father is still obligated afterwards, maybe that's only while he's still a child. Maybe the son is now obligated, the father is not. Meaning maybe it's now switched. There is now no longer an obligation on the father, no more than any other Jew. The child is now obligated, the father is not. So he says that's proof number one. He makes the suggestion and then he rejects it. He says, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that this is a good suggestion. Let's make another suggestion here. Says Shuvra isi b'divrei harabim mechaber sef mitzvah shin tzadik beis. Says later on in mitzvah 392, the Sefer HaChinuch writes as follows. It says lefi ha'daimeh sha'av chayev la'olam l'vdos b'nai. The same way that a father is always obligated to redeem his son. Afilu la'achar shehigdil haben ha'mitzvah mutelas ala'av. After it says even after the child has grown beyond the age of a mitzvah, the father is obligated to do a pidyon, a ben for his son. The Sefer HaChinuch writes this explicitly. That every firstborn son you have to redeem. He says, he says the mitzvah belongs to the father. This is how it seems in the Gemara in Kiddushin. Says the Minchas Chinuch, he says, says you see that the Sefer HaChinuch was debating about this. He says, and it seems to me that the father is still obligated to give a pidyon haben once the son is 13. He says, and it seems to be, he says, it seems that the pasuk tells me that I should give my son a pidyon haben after 13. He says, but here the pasuk indicates the opposite. By Bris Milah, the pasuk seems to only be talking about little children. Maybe the Sefer HaChinuch himself would say that the father is no longer obligated. But Tzachion, he says, this is still a question by me. He says, and I've not found anybody that has dealt with this question. Now, the Minchas Chinuch died like 120 years ago, whatever it was. He says, I have no contemporary literature on this. Nobody has discussed this question. Who is the primary obligation on? Now, this question of who the primary obligation is on is, hold on a second. This question of who the primary obligation is on is an important consideration. We'll see. Thomas, okay, because of the question that we spoke, obviously the nafka that we spoke about, but beyond the questions that the Minchas Chinuch mentions, most often there are questions that come up with regards to people that have either converted or got a bris milah that was not done appropriately. This happens a lot. This happens over and over and over again. What do I mean by that? So I think like 70% of Americans are given a circumcision when they're born.
It's very popular amongst the white and the black population.
Right.
And then outside of that, not so much, but white and black makes up like 75% of the US.
Right. It's
And you know this because
I mean, you don't know the blacks are 12% and the whites are like
I just thought it was
62.
funny. I just thought
It's like just general info about the
Yeah.
country.
so. I mean, Muslims
Oh,
obviously
sorry,
do as well.
I thought you were focusing on the. I completely
I
went
thought-
over my head that circumcision's a weird thing to know who
that's
that was. Yeah, I thought it was the racing.
So
Yeah, I'm tired.
so
I got a lot of Christian friends, so it's like an
I
interesting
thought you were in the
discussion.
gym locker room. Yes.
Locker room, yeah.
he takes attendance.
Asians and Latinos uncut.
There we go.
It's so foreign to me, literally.
So this is where the question becomes interesting, and we're going to raise the question this week, and then we'll go back to with this next week, because the question becomes very, very interesting, and it comes up halacha l'maisa a lot. People ask this question. You have somebody that they balei tshuva. They got a circumcision because they knew that it was appropriate to get a circumcision, but they did it in the hospital. And we'll talk about a number of different possibilities. Possibility number one is that it was done by the non-Jewish urologist, non-Jew that did the Bris Milah. Option number two, it was done before 8 days. Most babies do not stick around in the hospital for 8 days. So, the pediatrician that comes to check says, aren't you guys Jewish? Yeah. Do you want to get a circumcision? Yeah. We know that we're supposed to get a circumcision. Good. So the urologist will be in tomorrow. You're okay with that? Excellent. Baby's 2 days old. I give a Bris Milah. Alternatively, they discovered a couple of weeks later that they want to do the Bris Milah. Oh, we should really do a Bris Milah. So they go to the hospital, and it happens to be nighttime that they do the Bris Milah. Bris Milah has to be in the daytime. So there's a lot of different ways that you could have a circumcision without it being done appropriately.
But you can fix it. It's very easy to fix it.
So
It's like somebody who's born with a
so
Brit Milah,
so-
they have to fix it.
good.
So
So-
how you fix it, you just
you do what's called
Make it
hatafas
look
dam
like-
bris.
yes,
So
and then you say the bracha and that's it.
okay, good. So this happens all the time. The question is, in what circumstances do you need to do that? In what circumstances do you not need to do that? And whose mitzvah is that?
It goes back to your other question.
That's the point. Meaning this point, meaning the discovering that you need a bris milah, like much later in the day, doesn't usually come up, right? Where you have a situation. You have a situation that you have a kid that as discovers he's 23 years old. His father is 50. Well, the kid's 30. You know what I'm saying? Like he's working for a living. He discovers this. He decides to become a Baal Tshuva. He goes, he speaks to the Chabad rabbi. He discovers that he was supposed to have had a bris at the age of 8 days. He realizes that he didn't get a bris when he was 8 days old. He wants to do hatafas dam bris.
What do you want?
Hatafas dam bris. Hatafat dam bris. They're taking a drop of bris blood, right? So should he call up his father and say, hey, Dad, you have a mitzvah to do. You have a mitzvah to do. Would you like to be part of this mitzvah?
But look at all these Russians that came here.
Yeah.
That was never done.
Why not?
Ask Shimon, he'll tell you, it was never done. They were offered gifts, and a lot of them said yes, and the parents didn't even take part in it.
So often because the parents didn't want to take part in it, because they didn't know to
Well, they
take
didn't
part in
even
it.
know about it
Right.
some of the time.
And sometimes the children didn't want to tell their parents about it. But is it appropriate for the son to call his father and say, hey, I'm getting a bris milah.
Yeah.
Would you like to contribute towards it because it's your mitzvah?
Isn't he supposed to do that? I mean, he's giving him the chance to do
Right.
that.
Or does he not have to do that at all?
Because
Or-
it's not the father's mitzvah.
It's not the father's mitzvah.
It'd be
Or it's equal.
Yeah.
It's equal.
It's for sure either the son's mitzvah primarily, or the father's mitzvah primarily.
You always have to have that in the mitzvah that it's somebody's primary, somebody's secondary, or it could be multiple people.
It could be multiple people. It could be multiple
If
people.
something belonged to the community as a mitzvah, then as a community member, you have as much an obligation as the next Joe Schmo, right?
Right. Meaning,
Yeah.
let's say
Some
that.
people are higher in the community. right?
Meaning, no. Let's say the father abdicates on doing a bris milah, and the child is not yet 13. So who's obligated in giving the son a bris? Everyone.
Yeah, you and I can rock, paper, scissors for it. And
Right.
whoever does scissors is thematically appropriate and does it.
Well, so that's a shaila, by the way. We'll talk about that maybe in 2 weeks' time. Whether it would be better to use a rock, paper, or scissors to do a bris milah.
Oh my goodness, a sharpened prop.
Yeah,
Sharpened paper or just normal scissors.
yeah. We'll talk about that halacha and ma'aseh with regards to giving a bris milah to a hemophiliac. Can
Oh,
you
goodness.
do a bris milah with a laser?
Ooh.
What happens if the father does not want to have the bris?
Yeah.
I don't want to have any part of the Jewish.
I mean, I don't want my son to have a bris.
Yeah, he doesn't want the son to have a bris.
Right. So
Does that fall in? I feel like this could be trouble because does that now fall community?
Yes. Yes.
So how that could be?
Well, so in America, you don't really have a lot of options. But like, in Europe 200 years ago,
You can't do it
start with
yourself.
that.
yeah.
You can't delegate because of lawsuits, right? It's not
No. I'm saying
No.
like, let's say I'm here, and I have a son, and I'm against this. I don't want to have a bris.
I think it's cruel and whatever, right?
Yeah, you
Is the
know,
community questioning the obligation
Yes.
to whisk your son away? and
Yes.
do it?
Yes.
That wouldn't happen here.
No, and
Correct.
I wasn't sure what
That's-
I meant by having options.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of options in America. Because if you, meaning
Options
He
for
meant
what?
like
for the community to come in, steal your son, give him a bris milah, and bring him home.
Yeah, that's what I said, legal liability.
Yeah.
Confirming that's correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
you don't have a lot of options.
So
anyway.
what would the-
No, 200 years ago in like Gershnevi stock, you
It's like
sure.
It's like a
Tie the
reverse-
father up, take the son, give him a bris milah, say shkoyach.
What if you're a 30-year-old whose father's not around and you find out you never had a brit milah and you don't want to have it? Is the community obligated to come take it?
No, because now it's your mitzvah.
Tie you down.
But what if you say I don't want to do it?
So then you're chayiv kares. Then now's where the chayiv kares is for sure gonna. That's where that kicks in. What?
ends there,
Right, meaning the community has no obligation on an individual that refuses to give himself. Meaning the same way that the community has no obligation to force you to shake a lulav.
Right.
Right. Meaning mitzvahs that pertain to you, we can't force you. Mitzvahs that pertain to other people, we absolutely can. Which is why we can force the father to give a bris milah to his son, because that pertains to somebody else.
This is crazy. If there's a situation where it's like and has to give the baby to adoption,
Right.
do you give the baby a bris
Yes. Have to.
at 8 days?
Yeah.
What if
Or what if
they don't do it?
yeah,
Do we
how
get
does
to
that
reverse
work?
mortara affair the baby?
I'm saying, what if who doesn't do it?
We
Meaning
snatch
if
the
you're a
baby.
Jewish single mother and you have to
Give up the
your
baby for
child
adoption.
For adoption.
Yeah.
How does that work? Like, how do you control if there's a bris? Is that now your child? You know, how is that?
So you're asking, is the mother obligated in giving a bris milah to her son?
Mhm.
That's an important question. We'll get there. Is there an obligation?
in
on-
that spot because whatever, it's a crazy situation, but father maybe passed away or something.
Right.
There's no one else, but I guess there's still.
Yeah, so we
community
said I
though.
said. You're
Right.
It says not there, no, you're right.
Oh,
It's
maybe.
Say
Maybe.
again?
It's a positive mitzvah that's governed by time, so women are not obligated in it except for like 3 or 4 things.
Right. So there's a problem with that argument.
Correct.
There's a problem with that argument, and we'll see this in a little bit. Is a woman obligated to give a bris milah to her son?
No, Moshe's one.
So,
Moshe's-
so Tzipora
She did it, but
Tzipora
she
did.
to save- She did it just to save Moshe.
Right.
not for any other-
So this is where things get interesting. And this is why Hatafas Dan Bris doing the taking a drop of blood is an interesting
But she
question.
used the rock.
Right, and she used the rock, but all of that was before the Torah was given. So maybe the rules were different. Meaning, once the Torah is given, there are different procedures that are put in place. But here's the interesting question: if you gave a bris milah wrong, meaning you circumcised the foreskin, you can't redo that. There's no control Z on that, right? You can't do it again.
Hey, according to the book of Maccabees, you can fake it.
Well, yes, but maybe.
No, but somebody who forced it to grow back. Talks about
Yes, Moshe Baralosa, yeah.
Whatever that thing is,
Yeah.
you have to redo it.
Yes.
Or somebody where they made a mistake. Also
Yeah, you
about,
can. Then you have to
the
trim
little-
it. Yes.
You grew back. You got like a fat baby.
The tzitzin, right? There's
Whatever it's
little
called.
pieces.
So
Yeah.
you can fix it.
Regrow the foreskins.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't look like they had a bris milah because it's a very fat baby.
I had an issue.
It looks like
Came back.
no backsies. No,
No, that's what the wife said.
That's,
I want to Google this. I also don't want to Google this, and those two things are going to war within me.
right. Just be aware that like if you start googling these things, the FBI flags you.
They're too incompetent.
That's,
They're too busy keeping Biden in power. They don't
There you go. All right.
As long as I don't put Republican in the search query, I'm good.
Republican baby with
Republican fat baby. With
Yeah.
circumcised foreskin.
God bless.
Yeah. Listen, they're not getting Epstein. They're not getting me.
That's geweldig. Baruch Hashem. So here's the interesting question: if you did a bris milah wrong, you did it wrong, but you've removed the foreskin. In Yiddish, I'll use the Yiddish terminology because it makes sense. Do we say the baby is gemalt? Did he have a bris milah that you just didn't do right, or did he not have a bris milah? Meaning, what's the purpose of the hataf's dam bris? Is it because he doesn't have a bris milah without it? Well, no, you have a bris milah. You just did the wrong thing.
But then why would you have to correct it?
So that's the question.
It's like remarrying a divorced woman, right? The woman that your person just divorced, right? So you could turn it around and say, you're just making an additional, you've made an additional mitzvah if you forced it to grow back, right?
No, we're not talking forcing to grow back. Meaning, you did a bris milah on day 6 instead of day 8. You can't redo it. It's done.
So why are you going back and trying to correct it?
Because of that thing.
Meaning, do you now need to do a pinprick on day 8? Or it's done? Or until you've done the pinprick on day 8 and onwards,
Yeah.
then you have a chi of kares.
I think it's the latter. I think because the pasuk again said the difference of the different things, and this one had the 8th day.
Right?
So
Meaning,
it feels like
so
that's part of the-
or, and this is where things get interesting. We're going to leave it with this question now, which is interesting. Option number 1: there is a mitzvah to have a bris milah. This obligation exists on every Jewish male from the time that they are obligated in mitzvahs, from which is the age of 13 and on. You are obligated in having a bris milah. Like you are obligated in putting on tzitzis and putting on tefillin, shaking a lulav. You're obligated in all of these things. From the age of 13 and onwards, that's your mitzvah. You're obligated in these things. It also happens to be that the Torah says to your father that when you are 8 days old, he can give you a bris milah. And that will then exempt your mitzvah of the bris milah later on. But his mitzvah is when you are 8 days old, either expiring when you turn 13 or maybe continuing. But no matter what, by the time you're 13, you need to have a bris milah. Or you are obligated in that. Bris milah definition being milah and priya, removing the foreskin and peeling back the membrane that's underneath it. That's called the priya, the splitting of that membrane. Option number 1 is these are 2 separate obligations. You're obligated in having a bris milah. Your father has an obligation to give you a bris milah at the age of 8, and that will then exempt you from doing the bris milah when you're 13. If If that's the case, well then, if you got a bris milah at the age of 3, so great. And if you got the bris milah at the age of 3 days, so that all that's happened is your father has negated his mitzvah of giving you a bris milah. He's made it impossible to give you a bris milah, which is when the mitzvah is for him. But at the age of 13, you have a bris. You've got one. Right? Meaning, this is a strange mitzvah because, I'll say it in Lamdisha terminology. There are certain mitzvahs that the mitzvah is in the Maaseh mitzvah, and there's other mitzvahs that the mitzvah is in the Chalosa mitzvah. I'll tell you what those terms mean. Maaseh means the activity. The Chalos means result. There are certain mitzvahs that the mitzvah is the action of doing it. For example, shaking a lulav. The mitzvah is to shake a lulav. You are obligated to shake a lulav. When? First day of Sukkot, you're obligated to shake a lulav. There is an action that you do. You shake the lulav. It's not to have the lulav shaken. Shake the lulav. As opposed to, is there a mitzvah to put up a mezuzah on your house? Yeah. What if there is one? You bought a house with a mezuzah on it. You're good. Yeah. So that's not a Maaseh mitzvah. It's a result. The mitzvah is to have a mezuzah on your house. To have it. Not to do it, to have it. There's a mitzvah to put a marker, to put a fence around your roof. If you have a flat roof, you have to put a fence around it so that nobody falls off. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to put a fence around the roof of your house. You bought a house and it's got a fence there. Do you have to now knock it down and put up the fence? No. The mitzvah is to have it. So what is the mitzvah of Bris Milah? Is the mitzvah to give the Bris Milah, meaning to do the action of Milah? Or is the mitzvah to have a Bris Milah? Right? So that's an interesting question. For sure, the father is obligated to give you a Bris Milah. That we know. The Torah says that. That Avraham Avinu is commanded to give his son a Bris Milah. That's the mitzvah on the father. What's your mitzvah as a son? Is your mitzvah to give yourself a Bris Milah or to have a Bris Milah? So that's part of this discussion here. That's part of this discussion. Maybe the obligation of the father to give you a Bris Milah always exists, but now you have a mitzvah to have a Bris Milah, and that's a separate obligation. And these two parts of it make things very interesting with regards to somebody that has a circumcision but was never given a Bris Milah. Or somebody that is born without a foreskin. This is what's called nolad mahul. Or somebody that converts to Judaism and already has a circumcision. Mahul. Nolad is born mahul with a bris. So all of these cases of trying to figure out what exactly is the obligation and who is the obligation on and who has to pay for the obligation of Bris Milah. And through this, what we are discovering is a whole world of trying to pass out when and where and who and what of the mitzvah. I'll give you one last case. That is a Shalosh Shuvas of Rabbi Dr. Moshe Halperin, who is the head of the Halachic Medical Ethics Society in Israel, was asked the following fascinating question. It sounds like this question came at least a number of years ago from a Hasidic bacha that grew up in Eastern Europe in like a Hasidic community, like old school Hasidic community that holds of Rabbeinu Tam times, right? Rabbeinu Tam times meaning take out Shabbat 72 minutes later, not like and bring in Shabbat 72 minutes later, right? In certain countries that they did that, right? Meaning old school Satmar, right? Old school Satmar. No. They all take it. They all take in Shabbos at.
They're taking it very late.
No, they take it in at the same time. I know. Yeah, they finagle it, but the Mesa in America, the minhag is everybody takes it in at sunset, what we call sunset. But there was a discussion between Satmar Rebbe and Baron Kotler about this particular detail. But this kid grew up in a town where he the whole community kept the later Rabbeinu Tam for everything. And he was born late in the afternoon, late in the afternoon, right? And was given a bris milah. Then late in the afternoon, 8 days later, he makes aliyah, and he's learning in yeshiva, and now he has a whole different set of rules. Now he's wondering, did I have a bris milah at night? Or the opposite, did I have a bris milah on day 7 instead of day 8? Because the zmanim, now my whole family used to keep this set of zmanim. Now I have this set of zmanim. Do I now need to go and get hatafas dan bris? Did I not have a bris milah appropriately? Do I now need to do hatafas dan bris? So Rabbi Dr. Halperin has a whole tshuva, basically figuring out what hatafas dan bris is. It's not so simple. Where to do the pinprick for hatafas dan bris is not simple. That's one whole category. When and how and who and what and why. Okay. And then there's the question. He says, I'm not sure that I have my bris milah done on day 7 or day 8. That I have it done at night or during the day. I don't know. Meaning, according to these poskim, I did it right.
7 or day 8 or was it day 8 or day 9?
Or it could be day 8 to day 9, depending on which side of it you're on.
The standards that were then as they were applied then.
Right. But now he wants to know. Now I paskin differently.
No, but it was a valid.
Right.
It's almost like the intent was in the right.
Yeah, 100%.
100%.
He says maybe it's a suffix deraisa.
Is it a suffix deraisa?
Maybe.
It's not a suffix deraisa.
Maybe. So I mean, we'll talk about all of these details next time. But what I'm trying to bring out here is that there's 1,000 different permutations of how exactly to understand what happens when you did a bris that wasn't right. Somebody shared with me that there was a whole generation of babies, that were Jewish babies that were born in Cape Town, that all had a bris milah from the same urologist. The same urologist did the bris milah. He was Jewish, but it wasn't Shomer Shabbos, wasn't Shomer Kashrus, not nothing. He was the guy that did the. What happens if you have a bris milah done by somebody that's not Shomer Torah mitzvahs? Do you now need to do hatafas dan bris?
Do you? I don't think you would need to.
So that's the question.
If it's a Jew, it makes no difference.
Are you sure?
That he's Jewish?
No, you know that he's Jewish.
I'm not sure it
How
doesn't
do you
matter.
even know this?
What do you mean?
How do you know that someone would be?
Because the guy ate a cheeseburger in front of.
Yeah, everybody knew
the
that
guy
there's-
from McDonald's.
No, but that's still
at
fine.
11
He
p.m. on
can
Friday.
still do a mitzvah. What's wrong with him?
So there's a question of a Yisrael Mumar. The Shulchan Aruch discusses a Jew that doesn't believe in God.
Okay, but does that exist today?
So that's part of the question.
So the
In
Jews
Cape
lying in
Town,
the hole.
Yeah. Yeah. So
The
that's
Jews in the hole today.
Right.
You
pull them out,
right?
you pull them out.
So it doesn't exist then.
so
That thing doesn't happen.
maybe. So maybe by bris milah it's different, because this is la'achnis b'risa shel Avraham Avinu. Now you bring him into the covenant. What if somebody doesn't believe in the covenant? Right?
That's the first principle.
Do you need? This is the question: is do you need lishma? Do you need to give a bris milah lishma for the sake of bris milah?
But every Jew in South Africa was, no matter what. they
So
were still-
so that's part of the discussion. Meaning, what if he says, no, I'm doing
Because
it.
in this country, maybe. but-
I'm doing it for health reasons. I don't believe in this whole religious thing.
Do you need kavanah? I don't think you need. The only time you need.
So
kavanah,
maybe.
The only time you need proper kavanah is.
Oh, so that's the difference between kavana and lishma.
I gotta head out.
That's and we to be continued.
I'm 17 minutes.
There we go. Pumpkin time, gents. Will be continued next week.